welcome to my channel. I'm Jasmine, the Six Figure Formulator, and today we're going to be making Cannabutter. Cannabutter has been one of my best-selling products because of its healing properties. Now, I know we're not supposed to market towards eczema, but that's what this butter is geared and curated to do. It started with my daughter having eczema younger as a child, and she always had dry skin. I couldn't use shea butter because she said it burned her skin. She has a very sensitive, delicate skin. So after tons of research, trial and error, I came up with this formula to help her, and it's helped her the most, and we haven't had any flare-ups since we started using this butter. When it comes to eczema, there are plenty of factors that go into it, which can be environmental as well. So I want to give this disclaimer that this is not tended to cure or, I guess, technically treat eczema, but if you look at the other issues that include your gut health and environmental, this can really be a big help for you. I use ingredients that include CBD, hemp seed oil, calendula, and chamomile, and a mango butter base because these ingredients really help to calm the skin. They're very delicate and they have a lot of healing values to them. So let's go ahead and jump right into it and make our Cannabutter. Here's our equipment that we'll be using today. I always say that to make any successful batches of anything, you need your scale. I have a larger scale here. This is for larger measurements that I use for carrier oils, butters, waxes, things that are generally going to weigh more per ounce. And then I have my lighter jewelry scale here, and this is going to pick things up that are very, very small, which today are going to include our CBD oil and essential oils. You want to have both of these because you want to be able to accurately scale and measure exactly how much ingredients you're using. I also have a double boiler, which is part of this right here. It's the second attachment. It's just basically a pot that you put water in and it heats underneath so it can melt it in here. This is part of my double boiler that I use to melt down the waxes and the butters. This is my bowl that I'm going to be using to mix it, and this is another one. I like to use more than one because whenever I'm making butters, I'm going to be using a special technique to show you guys how you can melt it and get it to that final result even quicker. And then last but not least, you need your mixing tool right here. You're going to be using this to whip your butter to get it to that nice fluffy consistency. And you're going to be using this spatula to scrape and get everything out as much as you need. One thing that I don't have shown here is the container. You will see me loading it up towards the end to just give it put it in a good container, whatever container you're going to end up bottling it. Sometimes, depending on which method you use to melt your butter, you may end up bottling sooner, but I always say give your butters at least 24 hours from the final cooling point to see what the final texture is going to be, because butters will change texture as time goes on. Especially mango butter, being that this is going to be a mango butter based type of butter, it's going to be but mango butter is the most finicky to work with. It can stay liquidy for the longest periods of time, but the melting and cooling method that I'm going to use can show you the quickest result to get what you need. We're going to start by putting this. You can put either one of the bowls into the freezer, and that way, after I add the melted contents to the other one and begin mixing, I rotate these in and out of the freezer to get it to cool down a lot quicker, as you'll see in this video here. Now we're going to begin to melt our heat phase ingredients one by one. So I put this on here accurately to scale. And we're going to be doing the olive oil first, or actually the mango butter, and that's going to be at 2 ounces. This particular mango butter I get from 3 kg, and for those of you that don't know, I actually have a list on Amazon where I get my ingredients. I tend to use Amazon because they usually get to me the quickest and they have the best price for certain things. Not everything can be gotten on Amazon, but I do have a list for most things that are. So we're just going to add in our mango butter until we get to those 2 ounces. And that's for this batch. You can use the recipe, the formula card that I gave you to scale up to however much you need. So there we have 2 ounces. And 1 ounce of Olive M1000. Olive M1000 is more of a quote-unquote natural type of emulsifier. I do use emulsifiers in my butters because they tend to help with cutting down on greasiness, and they absorb into the skin better, especially when water is applied as well. And you can use water after this, but since this is an anhydrous product that does not contain an emulsifier, you want to advise that only dry hands go into your butter. Olive M1000 is also known to help with scar healing and lightening any hyperpigmentation. So it's another reason why I selected not mango butter, but Olive M1000. So for this melting method, sometimes you can melt your butters and oils a few different ways. With this one, I'm only melting the wax and the butter alone. And I do this because when you melt these two just by themselves, they will tend to solidify quicker. If I was using another type of carrier oil, safflower oil or sunflower oil, rice bran, babasu, then what you could do is you can actually not melt the butter at all and just melt the oil and the wax and add it to the butter, and the heat will continue to melt the butter, which can make for quick getting to your final result quicker. In this case, however, I am using a heat sensitive oil, which is going to be the hemp seed oil, and you don't want to put that in your heat phase. I will be adding that in during the cool down phase and just doing these two and melting them, then adding in the remainder of the ingredients during the cool down phase. When doing your double boiling, you want to set on high. You want to set on high, you want to get your pot to a boil. Then you put your ingredients over, and we will come back to these once they are either clear or cloudy, as long as all of the wax and all of the butter are thoroughly melted. The reason why I melt down you have to melt down the waxes, and in this case the mango butter, because you don't want to have any sort of grittiness or any grainy type of pieces in there. Melting it down will give you the smoothest result for a butter. I usually come in and I will kind of mix it intermittently just to get them to melt down quicker. As you can see, they're already starting to melt pretty fast. I also stress that when you are making your butters and you're making any sort of cosmetic formulations, you want to use items that will never touch food. You want to have specific items that are just for your cosmetics, so there is minimal chance of cross-contamination of any kind that you don't want, especially if you are selling commercially. At this point in time, you can actually begin to remove the heat. You turn it down, and then you still stir intermittently while it's still on the heat source. But this is also a partial melt method, to where you let the heat melt it down. I would say for mango butter 90% of the way, to make sure that there's no grittiness. And since it's still hot, it will continue to melt the butters. We're going to bring it back over here, and we are going to start to get into the cool down phase, which means you remove heat. And then once it gets cooler and we start to see it harden up a little bit, we're going to begin to add our butters. I said butters, I meant oils. With this method, you will have to move quickly because, as you can see, it's already starting to regain firmness, which is a good thing. My method does require a lot more what I like to call babysitting, because it phases quicker. So we're going to quickly add in our oils and start whipping. This is my favorite brand of hemp seed oil. I find it at my local health food store. It's very green. It actually is in the refrigerated section, and it's very rich and dense in nutrients. We're going to be adding 6 ounces. When you add so much oil, it does make it so that our mixture is liquidy at first, but it will firm up, especially being that mango butter is a harder butter. We're gonna let rest and firm up and stir intermittently. I wanna say I do this, I check on it every, I wanna say, depending on the temperature of the day and everything like that and whether you're refrigerating or not, on average, check on it every 3 to 5 minutes. And you want to, especially before you add your oils, once oils are added, you can check on it every 30 minutes and whip for intervals of about 2 minutes each. So we're going to begin our first resting period, and we'll come back and check on it and see once it starts to firm up a little bit more. So after letting it set for several minutes, I do see that it is beginning to go into its next phase, which is almost like a thicker jelly type of consistency. If you could see, it almost looks like it's gelling. So I'm going to put it into the container that I began freezing, and then we're gonna whip it and we're gonna switch on and off containers. So this container is cold to the touch. I like to whip it in smaller spaces. Obviously this is a smaller batch, so that works for that. If you have larger sizes, or if you're using a stand mixer, then this doesn't apply. But for making smaller batches, I like to whip in smaller containers. It helps to whip it more smoothly so that it tends to phase quicker, and it goes into, and it makes it smoother as well. So once I pour this all into here, I'm actually going to freeze this container, and you could put it in the freezer if you wanted to, but I've found that it phases quicker and it phases more solid, I should say, when you do it and you don't actually freeze the butter itself. It's important whenever you let it rest to let it rest in room temperatures at certain points, so that way it can get used to being in the temperature that it's going to be stored in normally, and you can get to your final result. Because otherwise, when you leave it in the freezer for certain periods of times, I've noticed that it will tend to have what I call like an artificial state of being solid. It'll go right back to liquidy as soon as it gets into that room temperature. So let's go ahead and whip it and see how much thicker it gets. It is starting to thicken pretty substantially. It's still liquidy, but it is beginning to thicken. So we're gonna let it rest for a few more minutes. I'm gonna give it about I want to say, resting on the counter, you give it about 20 minutes. And then whenever you're putting in the fridge, you want to give it about 10 minutes. So I'm going to let it rest. We're going to come back, see how thick it is, and whip again and do this process, rinse, wash, and repeat until we get to our thickened texture that we are looking for. On just a very quick side note, you do not have to do this if you don't have time to babysit your butter. You can just leave it at this point, since the additional oil is added that'll keep it soft. You can just let it sit until the next day, and then come back and do the final whipping with the final ingredients added. So it is cool enough to add the final ingredients, but I want to do it whenever it's even cooler, since we're dealing with CBD and essential oils, to make sure that we just put those in at the time to where they're not going to have any sort of, I want to say, temperature fluctuation changes, because even when and during the cooling phase, sometimes it can be harsher on them. If you want to do it, I would ultimately add them either at the very end or at the very least during the cooling phase, when your mixture is no more than about 65 degrees Fahrenheit. It's thickened quite a bit here. Let's go ahead and whip, see how thick and fluffy it gets, and then add our final oils. At this time, it's pretty thick and whipped. It's almost to its final texture, and it's pretty smooth. It's just really, really thick. This is a good thick consistency that's stackable and that will look very pretty for pictures. So let's go ahead and get our scale, measure our final ingredients, and then let rest until 24 hours before bottling, just to be 100% sure that we have our final texture. It's always just a good measure of practice, because always, especially in business, when you're shipping to other people, sometimes shrinkage may happen depending on temperature and depending on the thickness of your butter. And this always ensures that you know exactly how much you're putting, because you wouldn't want your client to think that they got less than what was promised. I have my CBD and my essential oils. Chamomile and calendula are great for skin calming and healing. Very good for soothing irritated skin. And they also have a pretty nice scent to it. Note that I like to use Roman chamomile. Roman chamomile smells amazing, and it has the same healing properties as German or also Mexican chamomile, but I just personally like the smell better. Note that I am using my scale for this. For the Cannabutter, I like to use at least 2,500 milligrams or 2,000 milligrams. This ensures that you get a nice strong batch. When you are putting CBD in your butters, also be sure that, sorry, I just have to be accurate here. Also be sure that you know that the amount of milligrams that are in the entire bottle and the amount of milligrams per dose are different. This is harder to measure per dose because of the fact that you can't gauge the measure of the exact amount that your clients are going to use. You can give estimations, but you always want to put the amount of milligrams of CBD that you put into your butter are going to be the entire amount in the whole bottle. So just make sure when you advise, just always give a dose recommendation for how much should be used and applied. And it all depends on what type of CBD you're using and also the manufacturer's recommendations, but it's pretty universal that they want to start low, anywhere between, I would say, 30 to 50 milligrams, and you can go up as high as you need to from that point on. So let's go ahead and mix and see what our final result is going to begin to look like. And voila. that's how you make a nice, thick, whipped, and fluffy canna butter. Texture shot for the camera. There we go. Beautiful, and it stacks just like that. So this is basically its main texture, and this is still pretty soon after whipping, but this is about the final texture that you're gonna get with this. It tends to be light and fluffy, but at the same time nice and stacked and thick, so your customer doesn't have to use a whole lot at the same time. This was one of my best-selling butters. This is a very simple formulation that is also hypoallergenic. And as said before, it's very healing and full and rich of antioxidants. I chose Cannabutter to help treat eczema because it's been shown that the cannabis plant does have a lot of benefits whenever it comes to healing all types of skin ailments. And even CBD on a mild scale at least helps to calm irritated skin and relieve some of the pain. Even it has a lot of depression and anxiety helping properties. I'm not one for making medical claims, but these are the known values and benefits that are associated with these plants and these ingredients that I've selected for Cannabutter. So I hope this video was informative, and after this you guys should be able to formulate a perfect batch of Cannabutter. If you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help troubleshoot, and I hope you guys have a great experience making this to where you get it just like I did. Bye guys.